tuned into Masters of the Genre, where I, Cardinal Sin, take you right to the source of the most important genre creators of their generation. Authors, actors, directors, science fiction, fantasy, comics, film, and other creators that shape our genre fiction and entertainment. Get ready to leave the world of the everyday behind and go head to head with the masters of the genre.
Greetings, followers. It is I, Cardinal Sin, and today we have a very special Masters of the Genre Extra numero 10 with Clobberin Times and Canadian Spider-Man. And let me give you the lowdown on why we are doing this show. First of all, this is our first Uncanny Masters of the Genre Extra episode. Secondly, I gave Canadian Spider-Man 10 classic Amazing Spider-Man comics for his 50th birthday because he had never read a Spider-Man comic. So today, Clobberin Times is going to take us through each book and tell us about them. Make sure to stick around until the end of the episode when we give away comic books to our lucky weekly winner. You must be present in the chat to be eligible to win. All right, Spidey, Clobby, welcome to Masters of the Genre Extra.
Hey, oh, look at that, man. Look at that costume.
Hey, Clobby.
Dude.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, man. Look at you.
That's a pretty dope suit, dude.
Wow.
It's my new one. Thanks, Cardinal.
Wow.
Wow, reminds me of that scene in Spider-Man 2. Nice Spidey costume.
Right?
In the elevator.
Can you see okay through those things?
I can.
Oh, right
yeah,
on,
I
man.
can drive. I can drive. I sometimes drive around town with the costume.
Really? Well, I would too.
Or sling your way through or whatever.
Or
If I
sling
could
my
fit
way
it,
through.
if I could fit in that costume, I'd do it too.
Yeah, actually, he makes that costume look good.
He does, man. He
Thanks,
looks
man.
like the real deal. Well done.
Thanks. I am the. What do you mean? Looks like I am the real deal.
Well, you're the Canadian version though, so you do whatever a
Yes.
Canadian Spider-Man can.
Spider-Man
not a New York
can,
Spider-Man. You know.
That's true.
Does
Most
whatever a
people-
Canadian spider can, drinking maple by the shot.
I love it when you say that, Clobby and Cardinal.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I do. He has Canadian radioactive blood.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Can he swing? Not from a thread, but from a Canadian thread. Take a look.
Canadian.
Yeah.
From
Now,
a
Now,
Douglas
I wanted to mention right off the bat, a lucky winner is going to win 3 comic books at the end of our show. We have let me go ahead and make myself big here. So we have an autographed copy of Night Night #1 by Douglas Nelson, an
Nice.
autographed copy of Night Night #2 by Douglas Nelson, and fresh in the mail, his new comic book, Sun King.
Ooh.
So you must be present in the chat to be eligible to win. Speaking of the chat, let's go ahead and see who is here with us. Ari is here. Hail.
Hey, Reed.
Phantom Boomer is here. Hail.
Hey.
Derek McManus is here, and I know
All right.
he'll say there's been a murder. Anti-derivative Jill is here. Hello.
Oh, hey, Jill.
Thanks for being here. And I think for now, that's all we have. But I forgot to tweet my tweet. So there we go. That'll bring in some more
I tweeted it
folks.
out a little bit, but
Yeah, me too.
Good to go to get that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, please share the stream, folks.
Are you guys ready to rumble?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Spidey, why don't you go ahead and hold up your first comic?
I'm so happy to have these. The guy that sent them to me is fantastic.
156. I bought this off the stand when it came out in 1976. That's how old I am.
Okay,
You
cool.
said Stan, not Stan, right?
No, not Stan. Stan was already living on the beach in California when this came out.
Okay.
So this is the
he was the
Amazing
editor.
Spider-Man number 156, published
Yes.
May 1st, 1976. It's
Right,
not
well-
a comic book wedding till a supervillain arrives. Mirage, a petty thief turned criminal mastermind, crashes the wedding of Betty Brant and Ned Leeds. Will Spidey be able to save this special day, or will Peter Parker's identity once again be threatened in front of his friends and family? Plus, Aunt May receives a surprise visit from none other than Dr. Octopus.
Of course.
Clobby, take
Yes.
us away.
Well, this is again, you got to understand, it's been a long, long time since I've read this comic. It was, of course, this was during Lynn Wein, who's the great sadly late, but great Lynn Wein, the writer who was also editing the series at a time, wrote it. He was handling the writing on Spider-Man for many years at that point. Ross Andrew had been handling the penciling on the series for the longest time, with Mike Esposito and others doing inking, and so that's the creative crew on this one. I've always loved the Ross Andrews Spidey run, and I remember Mirage. He was really not one. Didn't turn out to be one of your bigger villains. But this is when, yes, Ned Leeds was marrying Betty Brant. All kind of drama had been going on throughout the series between Doc Ock and Aunt May, and I remember the wedding issue. I remember Peter Parker barely getting another wedding in time with Mary Jane and all that kind of stuff. He was the best man. But as far as I've not read this comic in a long, long time, although I remember certain elements of it, and in particular, the Ross Andrew art. Again, a lot of us really love that era of Spidey.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Let me see that sucker. All right.
Fantastic. And this little icon up in the corner means that it is the Silver Age of comic and not a reprint. Right?
Actually,
Bronze
it was
Age.
my mistake. It's the Bronze Age.
Yeah, it was bronze by
Age.
then.
Oh, okay.
My bad.
However,
And-
what are you
and
talking
Little
about?
stamp.
Which stamp are you? Let me see. Let me take a look at
I
the
think
cover.
he's talking about the comics code.
Yes.
Well, the Comics Code has been there since actually kind of put there in the late 50s, and then instituted. The Comics Code was on pretty much every single Marvel or DC comic at that point. So
Right.
that doesn't denote era or anything. It's just that everything that came out of Marvel or DC at that point has the Comics Code on it.
But it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong because you're the expert, reprints, modern reprints that were just printed in the last few years of this same issue will not have that.
Well, I haven't seen I haven't seen an exact replica reprint, if you mean it, but they haven't done a replica of this one. There have been other reprints, like in Marvel Tales and different various trade paperbacks, hardcovers, and omnibuy. Is omnibuses? Can you say omnibuses?
I think that plural of omnibus may be omnibuy,
I'm just being silly, but
or it could be omnibuses. I'm not sure. And Canadian Spider-Man, once you hold it up for us, you can put it down because we're going to go through a lot of these, and by the end of the show, your arms are going to be hurting.
Yes.
no, it's been reprinted. There were like a couple different printing variations at the time back then. Like there was a Whitman reprint, there was the Mark Jeweler editions, but for the most part, it's been reprinted in Masterworks and in trade paperbacks, epic collections, that sort of thing. So yeah, you can tell it's the real deal. I mean, now, if you see that cover on Marvel Tales, I don't know if they got that high on Marvel Tales. That would be a reprint.
Oh. So
All
it
the
might
ones
not
you got here
look like that.
are Amazing Spider-Man. They're not reprints. All the ones that Gil got for you, if they're the Amazing Spider-Man issues that he's stolen and showing me here, not reprints.
Omnibuses, says Phantom Boomer.
Omnibuses.
That's probably correct because when you
It
put
is.
an I at the end of something, it's for a Latin ending.
No.
And if it's a
Yeah.
Greek ending, if it's a Greek ending, it's I. If it's a Latin ending, it's S's.
We say omnibuy or something like that as a Rush joke. It's not really to take it literally. It's just
Okay,
joke.
cool. Anything else that you want to share about this particular issue before we move on?
Well, what kind of condition is that one in, man? Is it pretty good shape or whatever?
Yeah.
It is.
Spidey, you've read this one, right?
I have. Yes. Yeah. I read them all in order as per your
Now,
recommendation.
if you had to go from mint to very fine to very good to poor, how would you rate it?
I would say fine to very fine.
Well, I mean, there's a certain grading system that they have, and it looks like it's it's impossible for me to know not having it in my hand or giving a professional grade of it. I'm a little rusty, but I used to be a professional grader, well, back in the 80s pretty much. But it does look in decent shape, though. Again, like I said, I can't tell.
They're all in really good shape.
There's no smudging. There's no food stains. There's no corners that are. There's no.
One thing I can tell you.
Yellowing or shelf wear.
I can tell you that it was sold and it existed in a northern climate because it's not yellowed out.
Yeah.
The newsprint would be really yellowed right now.
Okay, no, we don't have any yellowing. How
does it smell? Does it have that new comic book smell?
It's got that newsprint smell, I bet you.
Oh, it smells like maple.
I'd bag that. Yeah,
that could be me.
He's been hitting the maple early, ladies and gentlemen.
Bag and board that sucker up, though. That's in decent shape, and it's again, it's I mean, it's not like a super valuable anything. I do know that there was a 30-cent variant. Oh, well, of course. I mean, it's not cheap either. I think there's a 30-cent variant, and maybe a Mark Jeweler on it. But other than that, I mean, that's.
Ari says the plural of omnibus is Omni Soccer Mom Van.
Yes, absolutely.
And I would also like to welcome to the show my good friend LDG and also my good friend, your first officer, RM Briggs.
Oh, I love you, number
who
one.
says, no, it's omnibuses, or omnibuses.
So it all works. Good.
They're all correct, apparently. And
thank you,
greetings to Rui. Glad to see you here. And LDG says, sup, Gap, to Gap Stargate.
Nice.
And there is his channel right there. And there is Clobby's channel. And Peter Graves wants to know, what the heck am I watching? Well, this is a special episode of Masters of the Genre. It's Masters of the Genre extra time. This isn't Soccer Gill. No. And because Canadian Spider-Man had never read a single Spider-Man comic, I sent him 10 for his 50th birthday, and we are going through them. And speaking of which, I wanted to ask you, Spidey, have you read all of these?
I have read all of them, yeah. I just finished the last one on Canada Day, laying out in the sun on my front lawn by the garden, reading it. It was fantastic.
Excellent.
I read all of them.
What did you think of them?
It really made me realize just how Stan Lee, he was able to, create a character who basically doesn't have a sword, he doesn't have a hammer, he doesn't have repulsor blasters. He goes around and he beats criminals up with his fists and his feet. He bashes people around like the Hulk. I didn't realize just how hands-on. I mean,
or maybe more like Batman, but
like Batman, yeah, not quite like the Hulk.
Because Hulk's got that gamma green thing going for him.
Although Spidey is stronger than Captain America,
he is very strong.
Is he?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I guess he does have the strength of 10 spiders or something.
Proportionate strength of a spider. Mm-hmm. Yes,
faster than bullets. Yeah.
Yes.
LDG says, love the costume. Skogly Yotun is here. Cheers. Good to see you.
Nice.
Cheers.
And Gap Stargate is reminding me that you can get yourself something pretty to wear during this hot summertime at the Cardinal Sin store. And that is located at gillstore.com, believe it or not. So let's go ahead and move on to numero 20. And this one is number 159.
Oh.
And I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here. And Clobby, what can you tell us about this one?
I remember again, Lin Wein wrote, I think, just about every one of these books. He had a real good run on the series, and I remember this one. This is also, again, bearing in mind it was a long time ago that I bought this off the stand in 1976 or whatever it was.
1976, yes.
I distinctly remember.
I got a little ahead of myself. I apologize, Clobby.
No problem.
Yes, the writer is Len Wein.
Lin Wein, the late Lin
Wein. And
the
penciler is Ross Andrew.
Ross Andrew, Mike Esposito.
And it says, a triple battle between Hammerhead, Dr. Octopus, and Spider-Man. But when the explosive conflict blows over, Peter discovers that Aunt May is in more danger than ever. Plus, Spidey's Spider-Mobile recovered at long last, and you'll never believe which villain repaired it. So does that help
Tinker
kick up your memory?
Well, Tinker, I think, is in it and is in this one for I think briefly or whatever. But what was remarkable about the story to me was the fact that Spidey had to team up with Doc Ock, who was in love with Aunt May, to fight Hammerhead. And I've always liked Hammerhead. He's a weird villain, but
I've never heard of him. This was my first introduction to him. Half of these villains I had never heard of before.
They must have used him in Star Wars, right?
Hammerhead.
That was a little joke.
Yeah.
I used to collect those figures. But please continue.
Yep, he was like that. And again, I remember that basic aspect of the thing. It looks like you have the 25-cent edition. There was actually a 30-cent variant done a little bit later in the print run, but now you have the 25-center. It looks like, is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yes, you do. Yeah, because sometimes they did that. There were sometimes there were two different in the print runs, two different prices. This was at the time that your standard price in the U.S. was 25 cents, but sometimes they would come out with a 30-cent variant. I don't know if those were in Canada, mostly just in Canada or whatever. But let's see.
Of course, it's more in Canada.
And Clobby, why are these little black boxes at the bottom there?
That's just in the picture you got. If you look at the one that show the one again
that Spidey has.
Yeah, Spidey, show it again. See, he's got a one.
And hold it
one
up
with a UPC
a bit.
code.
Oh, okay, that's the UPC.
You got that from Sometimes the Marvel Comics database will black out the UPC code.
I remember I used to get comic books that had a little picture of Spider-Man in those, even if they weren't Spider-Man comics.
The reason why that happened is because those comics were direct sales only, comic shops only.
Ah.
So in other words, now they only started doing direct sales only in the early 80s. So for example, if you bought a comic in 1984, for example, it was a Marvel comic that was a newsstand publication, but also sold to comic shops. If it had a UPC code, it would be a newsstand book. If it had a Spider-Man's face or something like that, that with a different the price tag looking a little differently, with like a diamond shape or something, it's a comic shop only edition.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that last, like I said, that last one you had. Oh, there you go.
That's some great art.
That one. Oh yeah, Ross Andrew was fantastic on this book. I mean, again. And when I rank my Spider-Man artists, it's Romita and Ditko and Kane are almost.
Can you hold up the cover again, Spidey?
Yes, I can.
I love Andrew.
And not that close.
Sorry.
Maybe like you're reading it. Just open it up and have the cover toward the camera there. There you go.
Yeah.
And the editor, I didn't realize, never having read comics before now, the editor really draws in the audience by adding little notes, like little side notes, sort of not quite breaking the fourth wall, but breaking, the wall between the editor and the reader.
They did it quite often. You'd find a little bitty, for example, if when a character says something, often you might see a little asterisk near it. And then if you go to the bottom of the panel in the page, the editor has a little editor's note saying, this occurred in issue so-and-so. Or it would be some other reference to letting the reader know what they're talking about, a translation in a sense. They did that. It was a standard editorial practice at Marvel and DC for decades, up until probably into about the mid-'80s, early '80s, something like that, maybe early '90s.
Oh, fantastic!
And again, I love Hammerhead. It was a nice shape, man.
Oh yeah, no, and this is in really good shape. There's no creases on any of the paper. There's no folded corners, no tears, no rips, no stains, no yellowing. It just falls open as if you had just purchased a new one. No, it's fantastic.
Nice,
beautiful,
nice stuff. Love it, man.
And Hammerhead, I didn't realize. I get the impression he's not human. He's some sort of an advanced human. Or
Hammerhead, not. He's. They never. They probably went back and retconned something like that about him later, in terms of him being like a. But he's really just. He's
maybe he got his head stuck in a record press.
Yeah, he did. But yeah, he had. I'm trying to remember now what his damn story was. To be honest with you, it wasn't a mutant. Although I take it back, everybody at Marvel eventually is a mutant at one point or another. But if they retconned it later, probably, and I probably just didn't pay attention. I will say that I don't know, why is the video blurry? They just did a Marvel Legends action figure. Him and a lot of buddies of mine who are Spider-Man fans couldn't wait to get that one, even though he's
okay.
A pretty obscure
Spidey,
villain,
you can put the book down because the autofocus is making you blurry.
Oh yes.
So just
I wish I knew how to
either stand or sit there and look Spidey. And Ari says it's not blurry for me.
Gotcha. Well,
and hail John Witchboy, who says he has always looked like a Dick Tracy villain to me.
Yes, he does.
I guess that's a compliment, right?
Like Flat Top. Well, there's a Dick Tracy villain called Flat Top, remember?
Flat Top.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
He does. He's always reminded me of Flat Top. That's a good. But he's mainly like a gangster. The Marvel's equivalent to the Mafia is called the Maja, and he was in that. He was one of those.
All right. So moving right along, we're going to go ahead and talk about this one. Spidey, if you'd like to hold your copy up, and then you can go ahead and put it back down because I've got it over here.
Fantastic.
And let me see what I have to say about The Amazing Spider-Man number 163, published on December 1st, 1976. Spider-Man versus the Kingpin. After recovering from a catatonic state, Kingpin finds himself back in villainous form. Peter receives a surprise gift of furniture from his closest friends, but before he can relish the moment, he must consider where things stand with MJ. Will Peter be able to be honest with himself and the girl he loves? All right, Clobby, it's all you.
Well, again, this is in the Lin Wein, Ross Andrew run, which again I enjoyed very much. I remember, again, just it was a great cover by Dave Cockrum and John Romita, which I've always loved this cover. Basically, what my skeletal memories of this one are Spider-Man was really pissed off. See, Spider-Man's always been a soap opera, and in this issue, he was just kind of pissed off, and he went looking for trouble. And he went looking for the Kingpin because he kind of wanted to start a fight with him. And the Kingpin, I remember him. I don't know if you guys are hearing me. Okay, you hear me? You hear me? Okay.
Yep.
And so yeah, and it's just kind of a big fight issue. So.
Yeah. And Kingpin, I think, is probably Maybe in the top 3 of Spider-Man's most formidable foes, in my opinion. You know?
Well, yes, one of the interesting thing about the Kingpin is how at this point he was still a Spider-Man villain. Later, Frank Miller stole him for Daredevil, and he became, I mean, to the world at large, since around the early 80s, he's been mistaken for a Daredevil villain. I mean, he's pretty much become a Daredevil villain. He's almost appropriated, in a sense, for Daredevil. And at this point, comics had gone up to 30 cents, in case you hadn't noticed.
Right. And Cam's Crash Courses is here and says,
Cam.
Cardinal Sin, Canadian Spider-Man, Clobberin Times, 3 of my favorite people in the world. Hail Cardinal, Spidey, and Clobby. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Good to see you, Cam.
Thank you, number one. But yes, again, I love this cover, and that's the thing I remember the most from it. Other than I remember Spider-Man had a pretty big fight with Kingpin, and he's got a lot of his great wisecracking in this one, and he really just did it to start up trouble. So I personally miss when the Kingpin was a Spidey villain, but alas, when Miller stole him, he's now fully and firmly a Daredevil villain. Daredevil stole this villain from Spidey. And so, what kind of shape is that one in, bud?
Oh, again, yeah, they're all pretty much the same. They're all pretty much just fantastic.
No shelf wear, no yellowing.
No shelf wear. No, and they had the backing to them in the plastic with the stiff backing.
The back and the bag.
Yes. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, they were all taken care of really well.
Nice.
Yeah.
And hail to Herc 130. Thanks for being here.
Wow. All the favorite people are here.
Anything, Clobby, off the top of your head else that you wanted to mention about this issue before we move on?
Not much other than I love this era. This was in the golden age. This was during the bicentennial, 1976, as we already mentioned. I can't think of too many landmarks about this particular issue other than, it was a lot of fun. Remember, I haven't actually read some of these comics in some cases 20 or 30 years since I've gone back to read them. And but you guys are making me want to go back and read this era. I will say that the good thing is there are a lot of good reprints. Because it's Spidey, you could get epic collections, you could get hardcovers, you could get trade paperbacks of all these. So, and I do recommend them.
Right on.
If I can ask, Clobby, if you don't mind, these came out in 1976, more or less. Had you been a longtime reader of Spider-Man at that point, or no, in your life?
Yes. Yes. Of course, like a lot of people, my gateway to superheroes was cartoons and things like that. So the original Spider-Man cartoon of the late 60s was my first exposure to them. And at this point, and then as soon as I was able to start buying comic books, 6, 7, 8 years old, whatever it was, and around 8 or 9 when I was able to ride my bike to the corner 7-Eleven and get my comics, I started buying comics. So this is issue, what is it? It's like 160, it's 163, for example. I probably started, Spider-Man was probably, when I was able to actually go, and pick it out on off the rack, was probably around 128 or 129, in the 130s, or maybe the 140s, if I think about it right. So it had been a couple of years that I've been buying, as again, distribution being what it was, you couldn't buy every issue back then, you tried. But I was a regular Spider-Man buyer for at least a couple of years before this one came out. Yeah.
Once a month they would issue another one, correct?
Yes, at that time he only had one title. This is right around the time that they came out with Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, and he had the other title, Marvel Team Up. And so I was buying Amazing Spider-Man and Marvel Team Up, and anything Marvel Tales, the reprint Spidey comic, I was buying that. Nice,
beautiful. Cardinal.
I'm trying to find a way to light it so that I can figure out where it's coming from. But
is that an Eagle Moss?
Yes.
Shout out to Eagle Moss. They're great. I love
them. Number 1382.
So yeah, I was like I said, I was a regular buyer of at this time there were at least 3 or 4 Spidey titles, and I was getting all of them if I could.
Yeah. Fantastic.
There. We can just put him right there.
That's awesome.
And I love this here. If you can get in a collected of this era, Lynn Weins stories with Ross Andrew, obviously you can get the originals. It's fantastic.
Yeah, well, these are the originals, and I don't know how you decided to choose these ones, Cardinal Sin, but thank you.
You did well.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I thought it was sacrilege that you've never read a Spider-Man comic, so I dipped into the petty cash and made sure that you got at least 10.
Some good ones, and I thought maybe you had some guidance from Clobby on which ones to get.
Oh no, I collected comics for long enough that I knew which ones to get.
Sure.
I figured.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on to The Amazing Spider-Man number 165, published February 1st, 1977. And let me get rid of.
By the way,
that
the
cover.
Publishing date is the cover date. It was actually published in November. Just so you'll know, when you see when you see the
that's
February,
when they put them
example,
on the stand.
Comics
yeah.
always back then were dated 2 months in advance. So in other words, like say if you see January,
so that's when to take it off the stand, right?
Exactly. So if you see, for example. February, it came out in December or November, for example. And this one was released on November 9th, 1976.
Right. I was alive.
Yeah.
I was
okay, so
I don't feel so old, at least.
Number 165 is the one that we're looking at now. Following an explosion from his Enervator device, Dr. Kurt Connors finds his control over the lizard to wane. Spider-Man uncovers Stegron in a covert laboratory, but is quickly disoriented by the arrival of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. Will Spider-Man and the lizard be able to stop Stegron before he takes the life of Kurt Connors' son?
Of course. Spider-Man.
All right. So, Clobby, take it away.
I love Stegron. Actually, this is one of my favorite covers of the era by the great John Romita. I don't even like saying senior. He's the only John Romita. No offense to John Romita Jr., but John Romita Sr. is one of the greatest maybe the ultimate Spider-Man artist for me. Obviously, the interior, again, Lynn Wein and Ross Andrew, Mike Esposito, like clockwork. They had a long run on the series. But I always liked Stegron, of course, and I always loved the Lizard. The Lizard's one of my favorite Spidey villains. So, again, fuzzy for sure about the whole story, but I remember it involved S.H.I.E.L.D., involved the Spider Slayers, and Kurt Connors, Lizard, things like that. I remember basic bits and pieces from the story, but I've always loved this cover. And I've always loved that cover by John. There you go. It's one of the best.
Yeah. I love the artwork on the Lizard. Absolutely. I mean, that's
Stegron, yeah. And then the interior, you got Lizard right there. I've always loved the Lizard. He's one of my favorite.
Same.
On the cover
I agree, Clobby. I agree.
Yeah.
That is some bitchin' artwork.
It really
Ross
is.
Andrew was great. I loved his stuff. He was a great Spidey artist, and he had a tough act to follow. This guy had to follow Steve Ditko, John Romita, and Gil Kane, and it's just, those guys are legends. And he came in and did a good run on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Fantastic. Oh, yeah. Spidey really gets his ass handed to him. I mean, how many times have we seen Spidey in that position?
Yeah.
How many times he's been? Why does he keep getting buried?
In the next panel, look at his shadow on the street. That's really cool. You don't see that very often.
Andrew was a very gifted storyteller as a cartoonist. Again, his art wasn't pretty in the sense that he didn't do like a really beautiful work like a Michael Plug or a Bernie Wrightson or even a George Perez. It wasn't polished, but he was pretty old at this point. He was a brilliant storyteller, and he was great at setting the mood. He was great at panel arrangement and sequential art, and he could set. I mean, he was very detailed in his panel work. Of course, Mike Esposito was a very good inker. So yes, those guys were trained cartoonists. They're not like the people today. They been around at that point. That guy had been doing that for 20-something, 30 years. So
Yeah, right. Oh, this was I hadn't heard of these characters either. I hadn't heard of these villains either. Stegron? Who's Stegron? I mean the lizard, of course.
Yeah, Lizard's pretty well known. Stegron's a little bit more obscure. He popped up in Marvel Team Up and some other things, but you don't see Stegron much.
No.
Granted, he's not every villain catches on.
No, well, I didn't realize like almost every comic has a new villain, minor or major, with Spidey, and I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and what Clobby said earlier about the villains being filched for other comic books, Clobby, do you think that has something to do with the artists and writers going from book to book, and maybe they're pulling those characters with them as they go?
Well, back at that point, it was almost more along the lines of who the editor was, and the editor would kind of appropriate other characters for that. But sometimes it was. Sometimes the writer would be he'd be fond of a certain character, and he would take them over. But usually, I don't want to say these villains are always monogamous to their titles, but you'll find them in other books. But for the most part, they will kind of fight one hero, and that's it. But not always. And for example, you'll never see the Lizard really, or almost never did he fight anyone but Spidey, because Kurt Connors is a more tragic story. Doc Ock and a lot of Spidey's big ones, usually you don't see them moonlighting into other books. However, Sandman was all over the place. He's a Spidey villain, then he's in the Frightful Four, the Fantastic Four, But Stegron, But usually, no, these villains do stick to one hero. Back then, you know what I mean?
Oh,
now it's all over the place.
Oh, and look at this. Look at that. How's that for an advertisement, folks?
Oh my, I wanted that toy so bad. Oh my God, I wanted that toy so bad. I love
now
the
you can just
$6
put
man.
all the bitcoins begin here.
Yeah. $6 million man.
I had a friend who had to go over to his house all the time. I loved that show.
I love the $6 million man.
That was must-see TV back then, and when that was on, we were in front of it. I mean, just as kids, it was just the greatest.
Yep, and when sometimes they did crossovers with the Bionic Woman, which was fun too.
My favorite episode was the one with the Sasquatch.
There were multiple Sasquatch. Yeah, him.
Pretty sure that was filmed in British Columbia.
Ted Cassidy played him. Andre the Giant played him. There you go. Look at the Star Trek dinky
Starfleet
dinky toys. Yep, Space 1999 and Star Trek toys.
Yeah, I bet
cool.
you
always see those ads. I wanted that shit.
Oh yeah. I
want
it now.
These. If you look at the and
get into a Slim Jim.
There, I had that toy every Christmas. We got that Evil Knievel toy, and every Christmas we'd have it broken by the next one. For like 2 or 3 or 4 Christmas straight, my brothers and I would get that toy.
Now, since
Christmas
this
morning.
was after 1976, this must have been his brush with near death on the Snake River.
I think it was somewhere in between when he jumped Caesar's Palace and then when he jumped Snake River.
Oh my God! Both of those were. I think you walked away from the Snake River thing because the parachute came out early.
That was some silly
I love
stuff.
those long horizontal panels.
That's a staple for Andrew. He his character of Spidey was long and lanky. Everybody kind of, again, because of a study, he draws everybody kind of the same. But yes, that those. If you look at those ads and those things, Spidey, it's hilarious, man. There's so when you're reading these as a kid, remember you're 11, 12 years old, 9 years old, whatever. You're reading the comic and you want to just get to the comic part. Then you go back and you look at all these ads and they're mesmerizing. You're like, oh man, look at that. Oh man, look at that. Oh man. They really knew what they were doing.
Wow,
look at that.
Time.
Look at the Star Trek stuff in there.
That is so cool.
Some of that Star Trek stuff, I think, was advertising from Lincoln Enterprises, which Gene Roddenberry owned.
Huh.
No,
I didn't realize
you're right.
that.
Yeah.
Even
it's
before
annoying
George Lucas
having
did
to go
the
ads.
the merchandising thing, Gene Roddenberry did, huh?
Yeah, he owned Lincoln Enterprise. I remember one time when the shop I was running in the early '80s, I got a phone call, Gil, and it's this really, it was back then. Said, "Will you?" The operator telling some regal voiced lady on the other end of the line, "Will you speak to this person?" And she, "Yes, I'll speak to this person." And you know who that voice on the other end of that voice was?
Who's that?
Stanley.
Major Barrett Roddenberry,
Oh,
No
wow.
way.
confirming an order that we've made from Lincoln Enterprises.
Oh,
Wow.
wow. That's cool.
What? Was it a
Yeah.
recording?
No, it was her. I got to talk to her on the phone. I told her I couldn't. I was so honored to talk to her. I was like, whoa.
Are you?
I
She
was
probably got that
18
a
years.
lot.
I was 18, 19 years old, man. But look at those
Fantastic.
Hostess fruit pies ads just showing there.
I know, right? Yeah. So Majel Barrett, maybe she didn't realize how much of a star she was, or she didn't take herself too seriously.
No, they just look. They did at that time. They weren't really. I mean, she was running Lincoln Enterprises for them, and then we ordered Star Trek posters and all kind of creative stuff from them for the shop I was running. But yeah, look at that stuff. Go to the Hostess fruit pies again, dude. Those things are hilarious.
Oh, I will. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love
Oh, by the way,
love the one on the second page. I bought one of those. If you look at the other page, Spidey,
Right.
put the other page up to the camera.
Yes.
The same fold, just the second page, the left hand page.
Oh, yes.
Hey
It
there,
has
Jedi
all
Bill. What's up, buddy?
those little different things that you can get. And I remember that's good. Thanks,
Motorcycle
Spidey.
mechanic.
I ordered a 9-foot ghost from the back of a comic book, and when it arrived, it was just a balloon and like a really thin sheet that you like nail up to the wall or something like that.
Oh, well, for $1.76 or whatever it was. There's the fruit pie.
There
ad.
was no villainy in the world that a horse's fruit pie could not take care of.
That's right.
right.
There was no problem that could not be solved in the universe that a hostess fruit pie or a Twinkie or a cupcake could not solve.
That's right.
If you look at that page.
Yep.
Now,
that's true.
as strong as you are, Canadian Spider-Man, you are going to get tired holding those things up. So
I am.
let's go ahead and move on to. Did we do this one?
No.
No.
You're right
Okay,
on
this
cue.
is number 167. And this was, it says it was published April 1st, 1977. And it says, with the help of electrobiologist Marla Madison, J. Jonah Jameson launches his Spider Slayer robot into battle with the wall crawler. But with J. Jonah Jameson calling the shots, the Spider Slayer has a less than satisfactory performance. A superpowered being named Will-o'-the-Wisp begins terrorizing New York, while Harry Osborn receives a visit from his psychiatrist, Barton Hamilton. Who is Will-o'-the-Wisp, and what effect will his powers of hypnosis have over Spider-Man? Okay, Clobby, take us through it.
Another great John Romita cover. Spider-Man's on there 4 times. If you notice on the cover of this book, he's on the cover of this book 4 times. I always this issue. I always loved the whole Spider Slayer stuff. Of course, that's something that was going on in Spider-Man for a very long time, where Dr. Smythe or whatever created in cahoots with J. Jonah Jameson, created the Spider Slayer, and this was a resurrection of that. It'd been around a few times before. And Will-o'-the-Wisp, this was his first appearance, and he just, again, we were talking about this earlier, like a Stegron or other villains that just, or Mirage, he's another one, ones that just don't catch on. This was a character that you wouldn't see too many times after this. But
Right.
I don't remember, again, I've read the comic book in many, many a year, but it was, again, I love this era, and I love that cover, man. Look, again, you get Spidey no less than 4 times on there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there's no doubt whose comic this is.
Right. That's right.
And down here it says, looks like it's going to be one of those days.
A Spidey day. Look, Spidey just, man, he never got a break.
I'll tell you what, You guys may not know this about me, but I am an unabashed Spider-Man enthusiast. I think Iron Man is the hero that sort of got me collecting comics, but I probably collected more Spider-Man comics than any other hero. He was my go-to superhero.
Right.
And it might have had to do with the whole friendly neighborhood Spider-Man thing. Actually, the one that had the biggest impact on me was the X-Men, because I was one of those repressed nerds, bullied, and I didn't feel like I belonged. I was out of place, and the X-Men, dealt with all that stuff, so that was cool. So maybe Spider-Man was my number 2, but yeah.
Well, he certainly had a lot more titles than Iron Man, and yes, I love Iron Man, of course, but Spider-Man was the face of Marvel Comics at that point. At this point in the Bronze Age, all throughout the 70s, he still is to an extent, but he was easily the most popular character for Marvel Comics.
Still might be.
He could well be, yeah. I mean, obviously, movies have made Iron Man very popular and such, but it took movies to do that. Spider-Man was popular, but it's a comic book.
As far as I'm concerned, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, 1 and 2 in particular, are the films that set the bar for a superhero movie. I could watch those over and over and over and over.
Agreed. Yep,
and probably mostly for the Bruce Campbell cameos.
Yeah, you gotta love those.
Ari, who is in the chat, and it happens to be my older brother, and handed down a lot of comics and magazines to me. And I just forgot what I was going to say about Ari.
He was saying something about Snake River that was on live TV. I remember it.
Anyway, he turned me on to a lot of these characters, and especially the Vault of Horror, Vault of Dracula, all the horror comics. He gave me hand-me-downs of those, and I will thank him publicly on this stream for doing so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
What better hand-me-downs can you ask for than comics and 70s clothes?
Indeedishness.
All right, so let's go ahead and move along. And we are going to talk about number 169.
You keep this man in suspense because you skip issues a lot, so you got all these gaps for poor old Spidey here.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
I
hoping
know.
that he'll fill them in.
I will definitely.
Yes.
All right, so let's see what I have about this.
Oh, yeah.
Published June 1st, 77. Spider-Man finds himself in hot water after photos surface, revealing him disposing of a spider clone. Will Peter be clever enough to trick Jameson into believing the photos are frauds? Plus, Spider-Man encounters a new enclave of street villains, and this time they're armed with laser drills. The return of Dr. Faustus. All right, Clobby, take us to school.
A great Ramita cover on this one, of course. I always like I love Jonah Jameson. He's one of the stable characters. Here we have another instance of a character moonlighting from hero to hero. Dr. Faustus is a Captain America villain. But here he goes and hangs out with Spidey for a little while. Like I said, they pick and choose, but largely he's a Captain America villain. Aside from that, I just remember this probably had... Oh, God, who else was in this comic? Yeah, I can't remember. Oh, yeah, Stan Lee was in this one. Stan Lee makes it
as a character.
That frequently happen in these comics. Yes,
he was a cameo in the comics as well as the films.
He made a cameo in the comic. Oh yeah, they used to do it all the time in the 70s. Sometimes they would actually just go to Marvel Comics. Yeah, but
interesting.
So, it's just in this one, and I was just, I think I was looking at the database, but yeah. It's again, I don't remember much about the story of this one other than the fact that it had to do with Dr. Faustus. It had to do with what's her name, Marla Madison again, with all that stuff. She was working behind the scenes with Jameson for the Spider Slayer thing. So
Yes, and
same creative team. So go ahead.
Actually, all the comics that we're going to go over today are the same creative team, although they don't list the colorist. I'm sorry.
They just go to,
they don't list the writer and penciler. Yeah, so they don't mention the colorist.
Just depends on where you go. Pro tip to anyone: anytime you're ever investigating anything you want to know about comics, yes, you could go to the Marvel or the DC databases and stuff. But my recommendation is to go to the GCD. That's called the Grand Comics Database. You have to know a little bit about how to search around in it, but it's got it all. It's the best. So
that's cool. Canadian Spider-Man. What did you think of this comic?
I liked this one in that because I thought looking at the cover, JJ has photos of Spider-Man and Peter Parker. But in this one, Spidey doesn't use his athletic prowess to get out of the situation. Peter Parker actually saves the day in this one, and using his photography skills, and his brains. He's Tony Stark level smart, maybe even smarter. And who's the doctor in Dr. Fantastic in Fantastic Four?
You mean Mr. Fantastic?
Mr. Fantastic.
He's that level smart. He's Tony Stark level intelligence. So Bruce Banner level intelligence at least. So he's
pretty
got some
smart.
brains.
He's not quite. He's not Reed, but he's pretty smart. He is a smart.
By the way, I wanted to call everyone's attention. I guess I will make myself big here.
Hey, Steve. What's up, buddy?
I wanted to call everyone's attention to the new Man-Thing that I had framed. This is another hand-me-down from my brother Ari. And this, I don't know if this was Marvel's answer to Swamp Thing or if Swamp Thing was DC's answer to Man-Thing.
No.
Clobby?
Swamp Thing predates him. It is definitely... I have an old saying that I use both ways. Marvel see, Marvel do, or DC see, DC do. Just more... Other one rolls off the tongue better. But yes, you can guarantee that any character Marvel or DC had, one of them was going to rip it off. And I like Man-Thing. He has a very different type of an origin and story than Swamp Thing, but he definitely was a ripoff of Swamp Thing.
And another thing you have to give props for is Canadian Spider-Man was saying earlier, that sometimes Peter Parker loses. He doesn't always win. Sometimes Spider-Man just doesn't win, and then you have to get to the next issue maybe for him to win. And hello, Maria with T and Telly. It's good to see you here. And Mattuine, that's a great name. I love that.
Nice.
But yeah, this one reminds me that first of all, it's hard for me to get J.K. Simmons out of my head when I see J. Jonah Jameson, even in the comics.
Yeah.
But he was kind of an asshole, and he only hired Peter Parker because he could get pictures of Spider-Man, who he hated, right?
Yeah, he was using those pictures to malign and throw shade on Spidey.
Yeah, Clobby, wouldn't you agree that J. Jonah Jameson had a hate relationship with Spidey?
Oh, he hated him. He hated his guts. He hated him just big time. Yeah, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
Wasn't there something with his son, John Jameson, where he thought Spidey had done something to malign John Jameson?
By the way, I did get it backwards. Swamp Thing, Man-Thing technically did appear before Swamp Thing. I always get it backwards. But yes! Swamp Thing's story was before his because he appeared in the comic book they didn't call him Swamp Thing. You see what I'm saying?
So
it's
what'd they call him?
They didn't give him a name. He didn't call him anything in the story. He came from like a horror story that was done before.
Oh, I see.
House
It was
of
just
Secrets,
the monster or something.
Right. Anyway, go ahead. What were we on? I'm sorry to be derail you.
No, I asked you a question and you answered it. So, very good.
JJ does not like Spidey.
Yeah. Right. In his first appearance, he predated him in the House of Secrets story. It's just he didn't really have much of a name for him at that point. So, but like I said, Marvel and DC love to rip each other up. Now, I'm sorry. I sidetracked myself. What were you talking about?
Man Thing versus Swamp Thing.
Oh yeah, we already did that though. I mean, then you asked me something and I blanked on you. I'm sorry because I was trying to remember something.
That's the last thing I can remember.
I did ask, and maybe I'm getting confused, but I thought there was something with JJ Jonah.
Oh, John.
John
Yeah.
Jameson. That's right.
Yeah. His son didn't his son have some dealings with Spidey, and there were some misunderstandings, and Spidey had no blame involved, but JJ didn't see it that way.
Yes, he hated. Now, John Jameson, who was an astronaut, liked Spider-Man. But, of course, his father hated him, called him a menace. You know how he was. He's a muckraker. He thought he liked to use him for... He knew deep down that Spider-Man was doing good, but he didn't like to admit it. And then he didn't like it because he had this prejudice against superpowered people because, guys like John Jameson was an astronaut who did everything on his own. He didn't use superpowers. He achieved things, whereas getting given superpowers in the mind of a guy like J. Jonah Jameson made you, he didn't like it. And a lot of humans, it's sort of like why a lot of humans were afraid of mutants, if you see what I'm saying. That prejudice against mutants, it was similar to that. And then he went to the moon, John, and he what was it? He went to the moon, and he got this, I forgot exactly how he turned it. He turned into a character called Man-Wolf. Mm-hmm. And at first he was killed, but he came back as the Man-Wolf. But so he blamed Spider-Man for it. What's his face?
Yes,
JJ. And had more and more animosity. He's the one that paid for the Spider Slayer so he could put his face in that thing and help with Dr. Smythe to control it. Later, Marlo Madsen. And so he went overboard with his hatred of Spider-Man, even though Robbie Robertson believed in Spider-Man.
That's right, and there's been an episode of the cartoon show from the '60s, one or two, where Spidey saved JJ or did something to help him out, and JJ was a fan of his for like 10 seconds, and then I knew he was a crook.
If his ass was on the line in Spider-Man, he knew that he would, he would save him. In fact, he also he showed some honor when he tried to look after Peter Parker a lot of times.
Yeah,
but Parker, in a cartoon, Parker, get out of here. But Simmons is so terrific as
J. Jonah Jameson. Yes.
That guy is one of the castings in all of comic book movies. You go, he was born.
J.K. Simmons is good in everything he's ever been in. Counterpart, Whiplash, the Spider-Man stuff. He's just a great actor.
Great actor and perfect for J. Jonah Jameson.
Yes, I agree.
That's why when they made those stupid Alex Kurtzman Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, and they didn't even have J. Jonah Jameson in them at all. No bugle at all.
That's because they were written by Alex Kurtzman.
Yeah, exactly.
He couldn't even not fuck up a Spider-Man film.
Yep.
Right.
Yes, sir.
I mean,
license to print money, really.
And what's funny is that he and Roberto Orci used to be my favorite screenwriter team, and I didn't realize that Roberto Orci was the guy that knew everything. And once he left, I think the last thing they did together was Cowboys versus Aliens, maybe.
I don't know. I've seen that though. Yeah.
And then when it got time to do the Star Trek films, he had no idea what the fuck was going on. And Camp's Crash Courses says, Canadian Spider-Man, you look amazing in your suit, brother. And he's absolutely right.
Thanks, man.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to The Amazing Spider-Man number 170, July 1st, 77. Spider-Man under the hypnotic charm of Dr. Faustus. After Spidey uncovers Faustus's sinister plot, the wall crawler is made to believe that his worst enemies are on his trail. Faustus has a master plan that will leave residents of New York City under a hallucinogenic trance. Will Spider-Man snap out of it in time to save the day?
No, he won't.
Okay.
He dies. It's the last Spider-Man issue. Oh.
Hey! Whoa.
All right, take us to school. Clobby?
Well, you gotta. I believe we're looking at. What's interesting about that is Andrew cover, same creative team as always. So now let's see here. Man, I don't have much of a memory of this story. I know it had a bunch of holographic illusion characters. All of the villains you see on there are Faustus messing with Spidey. They're not really in the comic, if I remember right.
And they're holograms?
Yes, or something
Delusions.
along those lines. Yes, illusions of some sort. Holographic. I
Remember the cigar
quote
that
me on
he's
that.
smoking? The cigar he's smoking has a chemical that brought Spidey under his control, and he made the mistake when they were in the showdown in the big showdown. He had Spidey under his control. He had him believing that these hallucinations were real, and then he had Spidey stand under a ceiling extraction vent, which was a mistake because all the fumes from the cigar that was controlling him were sucked up through the ceiling ventilation system. And Peter Parker's metabolism is very high. Spidey's metabolism is very high, so he regained his wits very quickly.
Okay. Yep, it is.
All right.
Well, there you go.
Well, you read the comic. We got two experts now. We've got an expert in comics in general, and Canadian Spider-Man is an expert on these particular issues because he's just read them.
Only these
Absolutely. Hey, your Muslim uncle. What's up, buddy?
Yeah. Hey, your Muslim uncle.
See you.
Hail.
Thanks.
Always good to see your Muslim
crowd
uncle.
Here. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
we do.
I love this cover here. And then by the end of this one, and I haven't read it in a long time, she'd have to correct me because I ain't Spider-Man, but I believe Dr. Faustus says, I've had it. I'm going back to fighting Captain America. I don't know. Spider-Man is so fun.
Yeah, I didn't realize I didn't realize there was that many villains that had crossed over to other.
Oh, they did it all the time. Yeah, villains cheat.
guess.
You know, they're cheaters. They're villains, so they cheat. You know,
Of
they
course.
cheat on their heroes.
You've been
So let's
moonlighting
go to
with
his
some other
comic form.
superhero.
Yeah, man.
Exactly.
What's the deal, Doc? Now, Doc Ock. Some of them were very faithful to Spidey, but you know, Captain America's like, hey, what's the deal, Faustus? Go fighting Spidey, man. What's you bored with me? What's the deal?
I never realized that.
Faustus is a minor villain. What's that?
I didn't realize that there was some comics where Doc Ock was helping Spider-Man against some greater threats. That's
It's true.
He was seeing Aunt May, you know,
Well, yeah.
much to Spidey's chagrin.
And I would like to say hail to Small Time Republic, who says, hail.
Hey.
The late 70s Spider-Man live-action show could have been better, not as good as The Incredible Hulk. That might be true.
I just wish we got the crossover they planned. It was supposed to be they were going to have a crossover of the two of them, and it didn't get made.
Well, not
And
yet.
hail to the lovely Sherry.
Hey, lovely Sherry, lovely girl.
Sherry,
Hey.
hi. They might still do that. Fan fiction, you know. Fans have the resources now to make films like that.
That's right.
You know, that Spider-Man show with Nicholas Hammond. I've had him on my show, by the way. Nice dude, long time ago.
Oh, really?
And
Really?
Oh, yeah, cool dude. Back actually 10 years ago for the 50th anniversary. We're in the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man now, and that was 10 years ago for that. But he was that show he was on. They were planning a crossover. He told me about it. They said they were going to be he in the Lou Ferrigno show, and just didn't happen. They did those other.
That
Hulk
would have
movies,
been
but they didn't
so
do that.
cool.
That would have been
Are you
very
kidding me?
cool.
I'd have been nuts over that. I would have been over as a kid when that was coming on. I'd have been
Everybody.
crazy for it.
Who do you think would have won in that live-action show, Clobby?
I don't know, but I think there's some things that mankind are just not meant to know.
Good answer.
Yeah.
We're not capable of knowing such things. I think we should leave that to the gods.
I guess that depends on how well webbing sticks to the Hulk.
He doesn't have webbing. He has like a white thing coming out of one rope shooter thingy that he has on the show. You don't remember?
I don't remember that. I don't remember the live action. No.
It was sort of a webbing. He had the one shooter, if you remember, and it was like a light rope thingy. I love that show, but it was crazy.
Did something break, or was it just different from the comics?
It's just that the budget at that time. I mean, it was very difficult to make it look, make it like Sam Raimi had. He had CGI and big money. They had this when he would swing from just like when he would climb up the buildings. You remember how crazy that looked? But that music, now that theme music though, for that show was out of this world.
No, both of you being
wrong show.
I'm sure you've watched The Electric Company.
It's like jazz. Oh yeah, that was Spider-Man. Where are you coming from, Spider-Man? Nobody knows. You remember that? Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, the Electric Company used to use a cargo net that they'd use as webbing.
Right. Yeah, they didn't even have shooters, did he?
Not even have shooters. No, just a cargo net that he would throw over people.
Do you mean the TV show, The Electric Company? Or...
Yes,
Spider-Man.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I didn't realize Spider-Man was on that.
Oh God, that's the only reason I watched The Electric Company. Man, when
exactly.
I had to see the Spidey bit. And not only
it was
that,
only short.
Well, there was a Spidey title for years called Spidey Super Stories. It was based on the Electric Company one. For younger readers.
I had no idea.
Oh, yeah. Look at some copies of Spidey Super Stories. They're great. But they're not in the regular Marvel Universe. They're made for younger viewers who watch the Electric Company. But if you ever see Spidey Super Stories out there, that's what you're looking at.
See? We invited the right guy on the show today, Cardinal.
Ari points out my first words were Batman.
Same here.
My parents put my crib near the TV, not next to the TV, but my sister and my brother would get home from school and Batman would come on and they would go na 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 na, and I went Batman.
Well, Gil, we might be close to the same age if you're talking about, because when it first came on network television, I was just
I think these were afternoon syndication.
Well, it was just going on network television when I was around 2 years old, and I was told it was my first word as well.
No kidding.
Batman.
Really?
I was saying Batman with a towel.
Oh, wow. That is so weird. Yeah, Pat S. says, raised by UHF.
That's right. Well, we got it all. We got it all on UHF.
Mattaween says Rita Moreno and Morgan Freeman were on the Electric Company.
That is correct.
That is interesting.
Morgan
I can
Freeman
believe Rita Moreno. I had no idea who Morgan Freeman was at that point.
He was Easy Reader on it was called a character called Easy Reader on the Electric Company.
Yep. That's
and he was on the cover of every Spidey Super Stories.
Okay, so that's it for number 170. Let's go to next one.
Now this dude here, Rocket Racer. Yeah.
I don't know. That's diverse right there.
It is diverse, I guess. Sure. But
so this says, the return of Molten Man. After Liz Allen acts uncharacteristically, Peter decides to do some investigating as Spider-Man. What dark truths will Spider-Man uncover about Liz Allen's half-brother? And why is J. Jonah Jameson acting so strangely around Marla Madison? Plus, Rocket Racer gives Spidey a run for his money. Literally.
Yep. I believe he was the minor villain in this compared to Molten Man.
Yes.
Okay, Clobby, go ahead and take us to school.
Well, I always thought this guy, I loved this Andrew cover and everything. I wasn't really feeling it with old Rocket Racer. Even as a kid, I'm like, this guy's ridiculous. He's kind of a silly character. But, I always liked Molten Man, and he was used much later, of course. Or not, he may have been in the next issue. I can't remember now. But is it coincidental that DC at the time had a Jack Kirby creation named Black Racer? I'm not kidding. Really did. That was his name. And I don't know if it was coincidental or not, but this is obviously kind of one of your goofier villains. It was, I mean, the comic was still in line with all the good stuff. It was, but Lin Wein, look, he was, I don't know. I'm not sure what he was thinking with this one. Nothing against the comic because I've not read it recently, but so for how entertainment value, I'm going to have to defer to Canadian Spider-Man on this one.
Okay, Canadian Spider-Man, it's to you. Since you've read this comic recently, can you tell us anything about it?
A little bit. Yeah, the Rocket Racer was just in it for one encounter, really. So the bigger villain was Molten Man, and Spidey had a really hard time dealing with Molten Man because every time Molten Man touched him or laid a hand on him, he would get severe burns. I mean, he's molten,
right?
He's magma. So he had a hard time dealing because again, Spidey uses his
hot molten magma.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Was that a church lady voice I just heard?
Could it be Satan?
But every time he touched him or punched him, and that's how he fights mostly. And the webbing wouldn't work; it was too high. He's molten lava, so he didn't actually beat Molten Man. Molten Man sort of, I don't want to spoiler, but he expired. His condition was
these comic books have been out for 40 years, so I think you can spoil it.
Yeah. You're good there.
So he was trying to help Molten Man recover from this condition, and his condition, but he couldn't beat him, not physically, because what do you do against a guy that's that hot, with that much heat? So. He had to. Oh,
and he was so hot.
He had to avoid him and try not to get burned. And he was still dealing with other. I believe he got shot by an officer in this episode,
right?
Previous one where he was injured from a bullet wound, and then Molten Man was someone that he couldn't use his physical tactics on, and basically he had to avoid him and try and snare him, and eventually I believe Molten Man. Succumbed to his condition, and Spidey couldn't save him. But that might have, in another episode, he might have returned through comic book magic.
I think he does, but don't quote me on that. It's, again, very sketchy. I'm glad you just read these because I have not. Let me see that cover again. Let's see which one you have. There's a couple different variant covers on that one. Okay.
Oh, you want to see his?
That's 172, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a spoiler. He does come back, but
I got the impression he might because he's an interesting character, and Spidey had a hard time dealing with him.
Well, don't you have 173? He's in that one, isn't he? Yeah, he's in that.
Hey, don't jump the shark.
I'll just. But yes, because that's I remember the Molten Man issue. You sure that what you were talking about didn't happen in 173?
Well, let's see. Here's number 173.
I think what you're talking about happened in 173. Did I remember this?
I got ahead of myself. You're right.
It's okay.
Molten Man's Last Stand.
You're absolutely right, Clobby.
Yeah, so, just Andrew Romita covered that. I remember very vividly. You really jogged my memory on that story. But it wasn't.
It is the next
I think
one.
It was that one. So, but I'm so glad you read these.
No, and here it says, an explosive conclusion to the Molten Man saga. Barely recovered from his battle with Molten Man, Spider-Man must lunge into action to save Liz Allen. In a battle to the death, who will emerge victorious?
This was a tragic story, actually, was it not?
Yes.
Because Molten Man was kind of I don't think he was so much a villain. If I remember right now, you're going to have to correct me. But he's so much a villain that this bad thing happened. Much like, Kurt Connors or somebody like that. And it's a shame what happened to him at the end.
Yeah, Spidey was actually trying to help him. You're right. In this comic book, he just has the first confrontation with Molten Man, doesn't know how to deal with him, ends up in a confrontation with the police at the end, and that's where he gets shot in the very first.
Oh, gotcha.
Did we move to the next comic? Can I show this one?
Okay.
We're on 173, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So in this one, it's a continuation from that story. You're right. I had it all as one story, Clobby, because these are two books where I have back to back.
It's the two
sense.
that are contiguous.
Yes.
Hey, Gary Ambrosia.
Oh, cool. This one, he does get shot by the police at the start of the, and he's injured. He's burned from Molten Man. He didn't do so well. Yeah, there he is. He's getting the crap beat out of him.
Yeah,
he's already injured at this point.
Man, you have really jogged my memory on this one because it was a very tragic story, actually. And I remember
the police are shooting at Spider-Man?
I know! That didn't seem right to me when I read that.
Again, in that era, Spider-Man was considered a menace because of all
If you read,
at this point, he was wanted by the cops.
One of them is shooting. The other guy, his partner, tries to stop. He says, "No, don't shoot at Spidey." And then it ends up where he's dealing with the injury, he's dealing with the burns, a criminal or a bad guy that he can't really lay hands on. The webbing isn't effective, and he ends up succumbing to his own condition.
You messed Spidey up in this one. Now, could you show that back cover real quick? As a brief aside. The movie Orca, remember that?
Yep.
No.
With Richard Harris?
No.
The one that came out after Jaws?
Yes.
Oh, here you go.
The first big Jaws ripoff.
Yeah.
Oh, there's some hostess.
The All-Star Snack.
The All-Star Snack.
I figured you'd like that.
Well, when you're selling to kids, there's going to be candies and cakes and stuff in there somewhere.
Sure. Yeah, dude, you really jogged my memory in that story. I'll never forget that. Yeah, look.
Thor, John Carter, Tarzan, the Eternals.
I had all of those damn annuals. I think I still have that Eternals one. And I love the Tarzan.
I have a copy of Foom somewhere. Do you know what Foom is, Spidey?
Friends of
Clobby does.
Friends of Marvel.
Friends of Old Marvel.
I have about 3 or 4 issues of it. I love it. I wish I had them all.
100 toy soldiers.
For
Careful of that back cover.
For $1.75. Nope.
Don't rip up your comics just to show us the ads.
No, I will not.
Oh. And don't cut the coupons out. And don't cut the coupons.
Don't cut the coupons out.
They have they have these little. For a while, Marvel was putting the Marvel coupon in it, where it would be for some reason they wanted people. There was a coupon thing going on. Earlier issues, not really. I don't think at that point in there. And I can't tell how many people have bought a back issue here and there, and thought they got a good one and had a damn coupon cut out of it.
Oh,
yeah, that's the worst.
Serious? Who would do that?
That's the worst.
Oh God, yeah. Kids.
Here's something I don't know.
Kids, man.
What's Pacific?
I did that to my brother's comics for Halloween, so I could put Halloween stuff up on my window.
They're advertising.
Sorry, do that again,
Comics.
Spidey.
What do you want?
What's Pacific Comics?
It was a pretty big comics
distributor,
wholesaler, retailer, whatever, distributor. Not they were actually sort of a distributor, yeah. And later, some of the guys that owned it actually made their own comics, and so much so they got luminaries like Jack Kirby and Neil Adams to do comics for them. So there was a publisher many years after that they called Pacific Comics, as well. Peace,
Yeah, this story was again. I liked it because I had 2 issues back to back, and the 2 episodes made,
issues. They're not episodes. You're thinking Disney Plus.
Yes. But yeah, these 2 together, fantastic. I really like them, and it's got some of it's got a little bit of Mary Jane in here. It's got some of the other characters. So Flash Thomas is in. Flash Thompson is in there.
Thompson, yep.
Flash Thompson, yep.
Sure.
And
on the football squad.
Look, go get a
BB guns. Yep.
These bring
used
back
to sell all kinds of things out of those.
Yeah.
All right, let's get ready for number 181, and I will read you. That's a little too big, actually. There we go. And I will read you what I have for this one. So this was June 1st, 1978. This was written by Bill Mantlo and penciled by Sal Buscema. Spider-Man's retrospective issue. While paying respects at Uncle Ben's grave, Peter reflects on his career as Spider-Man. Who in Peter's life has paid a price because of his alter ego? Will Peter find the happiness that seems to elude him? And can love blossom out of deep despair? Spider-Man's greatest adventures recounted in one tremendous issue. All right, Clobby, what can you tell us about this one?
This issue actually, it's sort of like a, how do you put it, like a flashback issue. Actually, Bill Mantlo didn't do a lot of Spidey writing, but he worked with Lin Wein, and Archie Goodwin worked on this issue with him, and Marv Wolfman was editing it at the time. It was good to see Sal Buscema, and I love this Gil Kane cover. But this whole thing is just a bunch of, really a bunch of flashbacks. Now, I have not read it in a long time, so obviously Spidey can tell us more about it than I can, but it was just called Flashback or something like that, probably, if I remember right. In the story, I mean.
All right, Spidey, why don't you tell us a little bit about this comic?
It's a flashback comic where you see Peter Parker visiting. Well, actually, he's in the Spider-Man costume, so it's Spider-Man visiting Uncle Ben's grave, and that is the distinction. He is in costume when he visits.
Oh, yes, important.
And he goes over just how he became Spider-Man, what happened. Then it also goes through a lot of the villains that he first fought in his first few days, and some of them I don't even recognize. I mean, I didn't know he had to deal with a werewolf and vampire.
That's John Jameson.
That's Morbius.
And he had like 6 arms at one point.
This issue was
Spider-Man
like
did.
Sometimes they would do something like this at Marvel and DC, where it was especially where they would take it and readers. There was Marvel Tales, which reprinted older Spider-Man comics, right? But they did stuff like this in the regular title, so they could bring some readers up to speed who may not have been reading comics forever. Younger readers who didn't get those comic books, and you didn't have reprints, you didn't have.
So this is kind of like the comic book equivalent of a clip show.
It is a clip show, except it didn't use old art like a reprint book would. They just had Sal Buscema redrew a lot of, and they wrote it in the form of. To familiarize a lot of new readers and stuff, because you couldn't, which I thought was a pretty neat way to do it. Now that's Sal Buscema's not my go-to Spidey artist or anything, but he did a fine job on this one. I love Sal.
Oh yeah.
Buscema is one of the greats.
I mean, his brother John's probably a little bit better, but go ahead.
And how do you feel about the webbing underneath Spidey's arms there?
Well, that was in the early days of Steve Ditko. Drew him with the webbing originally, so I like that. Yeah, nice touch.
But yet on the cover,
well, that's a great Gil Kane cover. You're right.
Okay, Kane didn't. That's why cover doesn't have it.
Well, cover doesn't have it just because they just weren't. I mean, editorial didn't catch it. It was just kind of a thing that when they were drawing the book, covers were quick. Either Gil Kane or Frank Giacoia caught on to it and put it on there. I probably should have been on there, really, but that was just a nice touch by Sal Buscema, and I believe whoever inked him, Jim Mooney or somebody inked him on that one, or was it Mike Esposito or somebody like that?
And they even mentioned Spidey's first after the wrestling, before he became his own sort of franchise. He's with the Fantastic Four.
Well, in his very first Spider-Man #1, after, of course, his first appearance in Amazing Fantasy 15, Spider-Man went that issue. He went to the Baxter Building to try to join the Fantastic Four in his very first comic.
Clobby, it wasn't until I read this book and I figured out the Baxter Building. That's what Clubby's Baxter Building is all about. Now I get it, Clobby. That's why you have your Facebook page. The Baxter
basement. I call it the Baxter Building basement.
I didn't know the connection with Fantastic Four.
Well, I'm a Fantastic Four kind of guy.
Yeah, I guess.
And I do love me some FF.
Me too.
He's having some.
Clobby, have you seen
Yes,
the Venture Brothers episode where the invisible woman
Yes.
falls in love with Dr. Venture and
Yes,
then
not for a long time, but yes, I have seen that.
I just thought that was
That
hysterically funny.
show was hilarious.
Yeah.
Yep, indeed. It's been a while. So that's a cool. I like that issue though, because again, it was good for younger readers, and I can't remember when whether I bought that one off the spinner rack or not. I probably did, or maybe I bought it later as a back issue. I'm not sure. Some of those other ones I definitely remember buying them off the spinner. But yeah, that's great stuff, man. I love this stuff.
I do want to say hail to the awesome Gary Ambrosia, who says, "Hail, you guys. I'm still at work and listening through my phone. Can't chat, but love to you all and see you soon."
Hey, Gary.
Love Gary Ambrosia. What a
great
guy,
gentleman.
as Ace
Shout out to Gary.
Rimmer was known to be. What a guy.
See, I get that reference now, Cardinal Sin. Now that I've
Because I also
Red
turned
Dwarf?
him on to Red Dwarf.
Oh, well, dude, you really man, you showed him some great stuff. I love Red Dwarf. It's one of my favorites.
Yep.
Yeah.
Smeaghead.
Smeaghead. Actually, I've got Robert Llewellyn's autograph and Danny John Jules' autograph
Nice.
on a Better Than Life
That's
postcard.
fantastic. Oh my God, that's fantastic.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yep.
You are a complete and total. Well, the word hasn't been what you are, but you are one, and a complete and total one at that.
Yes, sir.
No, Cardinal Sin Clobby has turned me on to Red Dwarf.
Great.
And also after Red Dwarf is Doctor Who next on the
The classic Doctor Who. Yeah.
I envy you. You have a lot of great stuff to look forward to. I love Doctor Who is at its best. It's of course one of my favorite things in life.
Yeah, and I've never seen an episode, so I'm not fully. So
where you starting?
Pleasant.
Where are you starting them off at, Cardi?
The invention of the Daleks, or the reign of the Daleks, or the
Genesis of the Daleks.
Genesis of the Daleks.
That's not a bad starting point. A lot of us started with the Fourth Doctor. That's actually the first one I ever saw.
That's the one that I recommend to anyone that's never seen Doctor Who is Genesis of the Daleks, because I think it's the best episode of Doctor Who, and I think it's also the best introduction to Doctor Who, because
It is a good
that's sort of where it all starts.
Well, I think there are a lot of good start-off points. It just depends on who you're talking to. For example, Canadian here is a very open-minded individual. Not only that, he can watch old stuff. Some younger people won't sit still for the older stuff, unfortunately. Not all.
Well, that's because they have legal marijuana up there.
That is true. I can sit still for hours.
You should start with Robot. You just start at the beginning with Robot. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with going with Genesis. I mean, because Robot shows you how Tom got started. But if you enjoy Genesis of the Daleks, then go back and start at Robot and
I will
watch the whole Baker
Robots. Robots, kind of a silly episode, but it is the
silly,
first
the
Tom Baker
first
one.
episode, though, the first part with him is just becoming the Doctor.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Tom Baker he's just from get-go, he is just infectious. I mean, you just love him. You fall in love with him right away. He's my favorite Doctor of all, obviously.
Oh,
I'll go back.
absolutely.
I'll go back and watch them all. I think Cardinal Sin has provided me with the first 10 seasons, I believe.
Nice.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, you were a gentleman.
And those are all
hopefully,
remastered Blu-ray rips, by the way.
yes.
Excellent.
So
I didn't
hopefully
rip
have some
them.
sort of
I didn't
accident
rip
where
them.
I'm laid up for a while and I can actually watch them.
God forbid. So as we wait for people to enter themselves on the giveaway here at the URL that Antiderivative Jill has put up, let's just have a little free association about Spider-Man, Marvel Comics in general. Clobby, what can you tell us about what it was like to own a comic book shop and growing up reading comics.
Well, it was an interesting start when I started. Before I owned one, I actually ran one, worked for someone else in one, and we started the very first one in down here certainly down in Louisiana. To our knowledge, it was there were comic shops on the coast, in the big cities and stuff. But in 1981 and 82, there was not much. Certainly down here. I don't know about where you live, but so I remember when I first met the guy that a cousin of mine calls me. This is like 1981. He said, I found this thing. You ever know those giveaway things they call the Shopper, where they have ads, these little freebie papers they used to give away with ads and stuff? It just said comics. And so he said, I know you like I know I love comics. So he sent me the thing. I ended up talking to the guy on the phone. He says, yeah, I'm a distributor. And he's just, they didn't have, it wasn't like Diamond that, who had a monopoly and stuff. There were several distributors. And he sent me this order for him. And I'm like, I'm seeing things that I've never heard of before because all I've been is to the newsstands, into the comic spinner rack. So I do all the main stuff. I'm seeing, like, I saw this mag on there called Comics Journal, and I was like, that's a magazine about comics? Is that possible?
Wow.
I've never heard of such a thing, which I became a huge fan of. And I'm seeing all these titles I didn't understand. So we start talking. Eventually, he talked about opening a comic book store, and I said, wait a minute, you're talking about a store that is meant to just sell comic books? I didn't compute in my head, like, there could be wait a minute, there can be such a thing. There's no such thing. No such thing. Yeah, I was 17.
A store devoted entirely to comics?
Not possible.
Yeah.
In 1981, my 1991 self was like, that's impossible. I just knew I loved comics and loved Star Trek and Doctor Who and things. So, no, we're going to do it. So I started working for him. We opened it up down here in the little bitty shed behind his house in front of a busy street. And then
what was it called?
Center. It was called Southland Comics.
Mm-hmm.
He started a distribution company with that. So we filled orders. I helped him fill orders and stuff at first and price back issues and different things like that. But we sold new comics and back issues, but it was a very tiny little building at first. And we moved over into a shopping center and opened one out at the campus as well. Had multiple locations. And so I ran those, but it wasn't my shop. Then a few years later, when I had to get out of the business for a while, I went back in 1988 to open after being out for a couple of years and opened my own up in Baton Rouge called Mega City Comics, and I just called them
Rouge.
Indeed, and I called a bunch of my friends and who had bought comics from me years before, and so I had a kind of a built-in clientele there and ran that for a few years.
Nice,
but it was kind of hectic. The comic, it's just down here. Look, there's a market, but it's not like it is in the big cities. You have to really watch how you order. But I could just tell you this: the best times, most of the best friends I've met in my life were, of course, those early days at Southland Comics, and I'm still people that I've known still for 40-something years today. Later at my shop, and then throughout the 90s, a friend of mine owned a couple of the bigger shops in New Orleans that I helped run for him. Our buddy Rob Valiant Renegade bought comics from me as a kid.
Really?
Right.
In New Orleans.
Wow.
He told me that when he heard me talking about it because he lives near me. And Gil, I can't tell you how many times in the late 90s and into the 2000s, I'm standing around a comic shop somewhere having a conversation with someone a good bit younger than me. And eventually they'll tell me about,
I bought comics from you.
I bought comics from this guy. And they were telling me about the story. I said, oh, my God, that was me. That's happened to me on several occasions, including our dear departed buddy, Mark C. As you know, you all knew of our good buddy Mark C. that we loved.
Of course.
That we lost. He was one of them who bought comics from me as a kid. And there you see Claude there in the back. My good friend Claude, I've known him since the early Southland days, 40 years just about. And it became a hangout. My comic book day, new comic book day, which if I'm remembering right was on Wednesdays at that point. I'd go down to pick the books up at the airport in New Orleans and come back, and everybody was waiting. No matter how late in the night it was a hangout. It was the greatest time of my life. Has been spent at comic shops, sometimes cons and things like that. But I loved being in the business then. I would never want to be in it now, or if I did, it wouldn't do for new comics.
Just old comics only.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I wouldn't mess with new books personally, but
Keanu Reeves, maybe.
Except maybe for manga, because I understand manga is selling really well.
yeah, well, of course, sure, absolutely, that I would, yes, yeah. I mean, because and I'm not into manga personally. I don't know about you, but I respect it because they do their own thing.
Yeah, they don't go for the woke thing.
No, they don't.
And Wesley Snipes is starting his own comic. Apparently, he's crowd
Really?
funding for it.
I hadn't heard that.
Well, Frank Miller's starting his own the comic publishing company too. So
Nice.
you know, I don't know if Snipes
Did you say Frank Miller?
Yeah, Frank Miller is
Oh,
starting
wow.
his.
I've always wished that two things. I've always wished that somebody would do a proper The Dark Knight movie. You know, with the story that Frank Miller did in that graphic novel. And two, one of my favorite comics was Ronin by Frank Miller. It's kind of like a ancient feudal Japan meets cyberpunk mashup.
I over-ordered on that one.
What's that?
I over-ordered on that.
Oh,
But
really?
not against my will. I was clashing with the owner when they announced that. Frank Miller was a superstar, as you know,
Sure.
Right.
because of his run on Daredevil. Long before he ever touched Batman. Except he did actually a Batman comic years before that. But anyway, one little one. But anyway, as far as he wrote Batman. But anyway, he announced Ronin. He left Marvel for DC, and that was announced. And because it was Frank Miller, and people were Frank Miller nuts because of his Daredevil stuff, the owner and I clashed. He said, "Look, we got to order ridiculous stuff." I said, "You sure you want to order that much of it?" I mean, it was, as you probably remember, Gil, if you remember the original issues, it was a very slick paper, very thick, kind of was like a pretty high cover price for back then, like $2 or $2.50, whatever. And it was a very thick comic. You know, it wasn't your normal format. It wasn't newsprint. Wasn't not even Baxter. It was very slick and very not cheap. And he said, "Well, it's Frank Miller. It's got to sell it." And I said, "Yeah, but I mean, look, I can't wait for it to come out." I was excited, but you got to understand, this doesn't have Daredevil in it or Batman or anybody like that. This is a completely new thing, so we should order it for sure. We can get it, but I think you're ordering way too much. No. Just sell it. Well, we got stuck with a lot of copies.
How many did he order?
No, oh God, I think I'm trying. He ordered it for us because, again, you got to remember this was early times. He ordered about like 60 or 70 copies or something crazy like that.
Yeah, that's way
which
too
was
much.
a lot.
Yeah.
And I said, "Look, I mean, maybe 30, 40. No. We go, you know, because people are going to really want this thing." And I didn't. It's a good book, don't get me wrong, but I didn't think it was going to catch on a lot. It was going to sell for sure, but not like that. And it didn't really. He didn't hurt Frank Miller, but it didn't really do super well. It was just good enough to keep his name and reputation up there. And then when he gets Dark Knight Returns, no one knew what that was going to do.
I just think it would make a great movie, you know, and I loved that graphic novel. I read it over and over and over and over. And I really enjoyed the fact that it wasn't, you know, the same old thing. I was into feudal Japan and samurai and ninja and Budo and all that kind of stuff. And I was also into cyberpunk. So it was like the perfect, you know, book.
Well, it didn't help that every issue took like months and months to come out. I mean, it was really late all the time. There was only 4 issues.
Yeah, I got the omnibus.
Yeah, you got the trade.
The graphic novel, yeah.
Right. Yeah, but like when you wait month to month or whatever, you know, back then, some of the usually the best stuff took forever to come. The biggest stuff took forever because these guys were slow. They weren't like Kirby.
Alf Jeebus says Todd McFarlane is actually trying to get comics in kids' hands. He released New Page Punchers, minifigures with comic books.
Oh, good.
Nice. He's actually my favorite.
I'm not a big McFarlane guy, but I'll take that.
Yeah, I'm not a McFarlane guy either. As a matter of fact, the reason I stopped collecting comics, earlier I mentioned how, you know, like writers and artists would go from book to book to book. And Todd McFarlane I believe started out with Spider-Man, or at least that was my first exposure to him. And
he started at DC before that, though, on Infinity Inc.
Yeah, and I wasn't a DC kid. I was a Marvel kid,
And then Batman.
mostly. But to me, after seeing, Steve Ditko and Buscema and all these great artists, his artwork looked to me like the Sunday Funnies. And I was like, this guy is ruining comic books. And then he went from book to book to book. And I started out, like I said earlier, collecting Iron Man. And eventually he got to Iron Man, and I stopped collecting that. He got to Spider-Man, I stopped collecting that, and he just went eventually to all the books. And then after he would make the jump to a book, the directive at Marvel was for all of the artists to do their best to draw in his style. So it's like the entire Marvel comic universe was Todd McFarlane, and I couldn't stand his art, so I just stopped collecting.
Well, he got famous. He got popular on Hulk and Spidey. I don't remember him doing Iron Man, but I didn't like it much either. A lot of people did like it. Actually, where he really got popular, he did Infinity Inc. Then he did Batman Year 2, which I did not like. I didn't think it was a very good story by Mike Barr, but he did a couple issues of it anyway. And then next thing you know, you see him on Hulk and Spider-Man, and he just became so famous for Spider-Man that launched him as a superstar. But then he goes and helps start Image, and got away from Marvel, and I just never really liked. I'm one of those that doesn't like Spawn or any of that kind of stuff personally, but a lot of people do.
I didn't like the Spawn comic, and I especially didn't like the Spawn movie, even though I'm a big fan of some of the people in the movie. It was
a lot
just,
of people didn't. Even Spawn fans didn't like the movie.
Yeah, it just didn't trip my trigger,
Now, people who like Spawn like that animated show. I never got into it myself, but
So again, a question for you, Clobby. How important do you think it was growing up reading comics as a kid?
Well, for me, I think one of the wonderful things about comics in their heyday, especially, was it does so much for the imagination. Again, it does so much for the ethics too. I hate to say it, but kids react to what stimulates them and entertains them, right? And so a moral story about superheroes resonates more than going to church. Let's be honest. I'm not going to church, but as a kid, look, I came up from a religious family. Well, I would be lying if I didn't say that I wanted to be good because Batman was good and Superman was good and then the Thing was good and my superheroes. I wanted to be like them. Nothing against Jesus, mind you. I'm just saying that those were all great and all, but a kid wants to be like these heroes, and these characters in a time were always written by artists and writers and things like that who were good at telling moral stories and about heroism. This wonderful art form, a gigantic chunk of it, certainly the superhero genre, is aimed at younger readers. That's just the way it is. And even though some brilliant comics came out in the 80s that deconstruct superheroes, as much as I love them, as much as I love Alan Moore and Frank Miller, a lot of the stuff they did was kind of destructive to comic books being about heroism and stuff. So I think they're very important to it, especially younger readers. They stimulate the imagination both by looking at wonderful art and these characters. Like Spider-Man doesn't quit no matter how much he gets beat up, no matter how much he has to look bad in public, no matter what it is. He doesn't give up, and he's very inspiring. So I'm a big cornball about that. I love my superheroes. Yeah. Heroic fiction is my favorite kind, even if it's in science fiction. I love heroic science fiction, like, in other words, original series of Star Trek and Doctor Who. I love heroes. And those are the things that inspired me the most. Comic books are a wonderful art form, Gil, and I think it's a shame they're not with kids more now. But there was a time, as you know, Gil, because that it was such a huge part of the pop culture that it was almost as potent. I mean, nothing was bigger than film or TV, but it was right up there for the longest time in its first 30 or 40 years. I was, when I do my Spinner Rack Time Machine thing that I used to do, I was noticing that almost every damn TV show and cartoon had a comic book tie-in. Every show on television, almost every one, almost every cartoon, almost had a comic book tie-in. Almost, there were toy tie-ins, and they really were, up until maybe 20 to 30 years ago, very huge in the pop culture. And I know they're not anymore.
Well, for my part, growing up reading comics, like I said, the X-Men comics kind of made it okay to be an unpopular, spotty-nosed geek, because the X-Men was all about tolerance and being different and not fitting in. And I think to a degree that could be said about Spider-Man as well.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of a nerdy scientific kid, in high school. But, you mentioned a gateway character earlier. For me, the gateway characters were the X-Men, and that's how I found my way into the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
Good. Well, that's a great one to start with. What Stan and Jack did in the 60s is they revitalized an interest, because yes, comics were still always supposed to be for young boys and younger readers. They introduced comics to their early Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and Hulk and Avengers and Thor and Doctor Strange appealed to college-age kids. And Stan, throughout the 60s, was constantly going to college campuses, or is it campuses, giving lectures. And they were comic books were so big now that imagine that, a comic book publisher having to go and meet with all these, college kids and stuff. But he did. That's something that was unheard of at that point. So
Right.
They had a mass appeal back then, even not just with kids, because as much as I loved people loved the DC heroes at the time, it was the Marvel heroes that really, without what was done, without what was created by Jack Kirby with some help by Stan Lee, those Marvel heroes would not have revitalized the industry that was withering on the vine until 1961, and went on to give comics a chance to survive for another 30 or 40 years before they were killed again. And they survived long enough, interestingly enough, to become movies, and now they're movies. These characters are movie characters now. They're not comic book characters anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, they are. But
Yeah.
that's another thing. The wonderful thing about this art form of comic books, that it endured and was healthy as an industry, and unfortunately the companies that worked in it are slime, but built on the blood of their creators, unfortunately. But it thrived in the pop culture for about, comics have been around for about almost 90 years, but for about 60 to 70 of those, it was huge. Now it's inconsequential as far as America.
Actually, when I was looking up the difference between Silver and Golden Age, they mentioned comics from 100 years ago that were, I think, the first proper comic books that there were. They might have been science fiction or, like the Hugo Gernsback era, but the earliest comic books that I remember from owning were, like Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos, and the stuff where they were actually fighting the Nazis, like Captain America was in World War II from the 40s.
Right.
Well, the first comic book ever, this first book that is considered a comic book, of course, is Famous Funnies. And it was a bunch of comic book strips cut up to put into a comic book format. And so, by Eastern Coloring or whatever they were. And
when was that?
1934.
34.
Right. And before, there's all kind of famous stories going around how the mob controlled comics back then. And a lot of these these publishers were front companies for the mob, and they were magazine publishers. But the Gernsback stuff you're talking about, those are pulps. Those
Right.
are different from comics. But yes, comics started in 1934. Not too long after that, National Periodical Publications, which became better known as DC, started with detective comics and then adventure comics and different things like that. And as you know, eventually ended up with Superman, Batman and stuff. So 1934 is the starting point, though. There were comic strips and there's a very distinction to be made. Comic strips all throughout the 19 teens, and even before that, even as early as in the 1800s, with Buster Brown, E.C. Alcott, Buster Brown, things like that. In the 19 teens is the most popular stuff being Winsor McCay's, Winsor McCay's work on Little Nemo, things like that. But pulps were the big thing in the 20s, actually in the teens and the 20s. Basically John Carter and Tarzan and those Buck Rogers and all those other characters were pulp characters. But
Right.
comic book strips were considered a lot classier than comic books, and comic strips are what gave us comic books
From newspapers.
Yes,
Right.
well, like I said, that first one was a bunch of newspaper comics reprinted into a comic book format. But later, later they started coming out with comics that were original stories for comic books. So 1934 is the starting point, really.
What could you tell us, if you could summarize it briefly, that would be the difference between the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the Bronze Age? Are those strictly just artificial, times that they put on as far as collecting, or were they different sizes, or different comics codes, or what?
Well, Golden Age comics are actually literally are a little bit larger than Silver Age comics, and then they got small in Bronze Age. So actually, size, that's true. But actually, I think what it denotes is a beginning. Like I said, Famous Funnies with like 34-ish, and then a transitionary period where in the 40s and in the early 50s you had basically the comic book witch hunts. You basically had the congressional hearings that were brought upon by a bunch in Congress by Frederick Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent, the author of Dr. Frederick Wortham, they had a lot of horror comics, police comics, and different comics that were very violent and very, that parents groups had started to become very concerned about. Most opposition organized by Frederick Wortham, Dr. Frederick Wortham, and he took these things to Congress and wiped out a bunch of the publishers who were making bank big time on EC Comics. You've mentioned those earlier, that you were a fan of those. EC and a lot of the other more violent comics, which eventually led to the Comics Code being adopted. At that point, the only comics that were left were some westerns, romance comics, and a few superhero comics. And then DC around 54-ish, I always get my years confused, 54, 55, when they brought in the Silver Age Flash, Barry Allen, and the Silver Age Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, is considered in Showcase Comics. That's considered when the Silver Age starts, because they decided to revamp the superhero genre. They kept, Superman and Batman were still being printed. Captain America was still being printed. It was later at some point called Captain America Commie Smasher at that point. But they were still, like, for example, Marvel was called Atlas at this point. They were more timely than they were Atlas. They weren't even Marvel yet, really.
Right.
But they had almost no superheroes left. They were doing monster books, and I mean, like, science fiction monster books, westerns, romance, that kind of stuff. And then Flash and Green Lantern Silver Age versions, Julius Schwartz, a brilliant man named Julius Schwartz, came along and decided he didn't like the Golden Age versions of Flash and Green Lantern that much. He thought their powers were their origins were a little magic-y. So he'd been the science fiction book. He'd been a book agent of people like Ray Bradbury, Alfred Bester, and others, Julius Schwartz. Mm-hmm. So he came into comics as National's editor, meaning DC's editor, and revamped Green Lantern and Flash, and they started around 54-ish, and Simon and Kirby started creating some comics for DC and Marvel. They were all over the place. So 54 or so was where the Silver Age starts, and then in 61, when the Fantastic Four started, Atlas at that time, Marvel was going out of business. They were in trouble. Some say they were packing up the furniture. That could be apocrypha, but they basically, it is said that Martin Goodman, who ran Atlas Marvel, and Stan Lee begged Jack Kirby to create a comic for them because of a legendary golf game played by where Goodman and Leibowitz, whatever his name, Leibowitz was the publisher of DC at the time, and he was telling him how the kids really love this Justice League thing we got. Basically, wait a minute, putting superheroes all together in a comic, they
all
like
on
that,
a team? Yeah.
A team. So
Nice.
Stan and they asked Jack, let's do superheroes again. Kids are liking this, so he creates the Fantastic Four, basically not entirely from whole cloth, because Kirby and Simon had a book earlier for DC called Challengers of the Unknown. Basically, they're the Fantastic Four without superpowers. So he kind of copied himself a little bit, and he had a guy who could stretch. What's that sound like? Plastic Man in earlier comics. He had invisibility powers, with a lady with that. And you had a guy who could burst into flames. There was already an original Human Torch, but you have a new Human Torch. So there was a lot of originality to the FF. But then you got this guy who's a pile of orange rocks. And he's a monster, but he's a hero.
Let's see, what is his name?
Yeah, I think he's called the It or something. No, the Thing. And that had never been done. A character because usually in this kind of fiction, if you get turned into a monster in that story, you become a monster and you do monstrous things.
Right.
Now, Ben Grimm walked that abyss for a long time early on in the FF, but didn't really. He stayed good, and so that group of characters that didn't seem like superheroes at first, they didn't get costumes or uniforms until issue 3 of the FF, by the way, was really resonating with fans. But one of the first things they said after issue 2 came out, you got to give them costumes. And so Fantastic Four started picking up steam, and then what happened next? Ended up with things like, the Avengers, and Spider-Man, Hulk, Avengers, bring back Thor, just started steamrolling, and Marvel, at that point, an atrophying industry for Marvel anyway, was born. And at that time, the distribution company that was publishing Marvel was owned by National DC. So Marvel's only allowed to print like 8 comic books at a time. But eventually, look what happened. They just started outselling DC. And from then on, they became the most bitter of rivals.
Yeah.
As you can imagine. People always say, are you a Marvel guy or a DC guy?
And even though writers and artists would go between the two, sometimes more than once.
Oh, yeah, the freelancers did. Now, you had a couple guys who were stable there, but none of them had contracts.
Right.
No, nobody, but they stayed exclusive. And again, I'm sorry, I know I rambled too much on that, but I apologize about that.
Final question. How important is Chris Claremont?
Very. Chris Claremont really, he took the X-Men. Lynn Wein, of course, did a lot early on with them. I'm talking about the new X-Men. Obviously, the original X-Men were created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, and then that was a comic. That comic was not successful. That was unlike FF or Avengers. It was it turned into a reprint book after 60-something, issue 60-something, and then for 20 and 30-something issues was reprints until X-Men 94 came around right before that giant-sized X-Men #1, and Lynn Wein and a couple of people did those, and Chris Claremont came in fairly early. And Chris Claremont, yes, along with the guys like Roy Thomas and Dave Cockrum and then John Byrne and Terry Austin, in other words, the X-Men would have been nowhere, and the new X-Men would have been nowhere near as popular. The phenomenon that they are without what Chris Claremont did. There were other people, like I said, but I think his name is probably the most important when it comes to the success of the X-Men.
I would agree with that. And with that, let me welcome onto the show Anti-Derivative Jill.
Jill! Oh,
hello, Jill.
Hey!
Hey,
Jill.
good evening.
Great to
Good to see you.
Okay.
Yeah, great to see you guys too.
What do you think about all this comic book nonsense?
It's wonderful. I love learning about this stuff. I don't know much about it, but one of
Have
these
you
days
ever read the Star Trek comics?
I actually have read a couple of them because of how much Clobby talks about them. So of course, the first comics I get are Star Trek ones. So I've read a few to my son already, and he says he likes it better than the show.
Well, that's
really?
Yeah, that's kind of a no-brainer. Wow. Especially if we're talking about new Star Trek.
Oh, well, I don't tell him
When that
that.
start happening?
He doesn't,
good.
He knows.
It doesn't exist.
Well, I mean, the original Star Trek was a family show, and new Star Trek, you can't play for kids because they drop F-bombs all over the place. They murder people straight out, you know.
Right.
Exactly.
Rip people's eyeballs out.
It's just crazy. Anyway.
No, he does like Red Dwarf, though.
Oh, good. Good.
How old is he?
He's 9.
Okay, that's perfect. Red Dwarf. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So to remind everyone,
themes, but he's getting there anyway.
we're giving away an autographed copy of Night Night #1 by Douglas Nelson.
Nice.
Night Night #2, autographed by Douglas Nelson. And
Douglas Nelson.
fresh from the printer, also a copy of Sun King #1.
Excellent. Oh, great
Beautiful.
stuff.
So these are our giveaways, and we are going to go ahead and bring on the wheel, and Jill will do us the honor of spinning the wheel. Are you ready?
Ready.
Go ahead and spin it. Oh, I almost get nauseous seeing my head spin around like that. Cam-Cam's Crash Courses.
Beautiful.
Cam.
Congratulations. So, Cam, all you have to do is send me your mailing address to gill@sunflower.com, and I will pop those in the mail to you. And once again, congratulations.
Congrats indeed, sir.
And Jill, thanks for bringing the wheel on and for coming on. It's always good to hang out with you. And I also wanted to thank both Clobberin Times and Canadian Spider-Man for being part of this show. And I think we had a great time. Learned a lot of stuff. And I think at this point it's obvious to everyone that I picked up the comic books in the order that I did so that Canadian Spider-Man can fill in the details if he so desires.
I do.
Very good. Clobby, can you tell us for a minute, plug what you're going to be doing here in the next week?
Oh, well, sure. And again, thanks for having me, buddy. It was been a lot of fun. I appreciate that. I'm honored to be here. I really appreciate
Thanks for being on the channel.
Well, thank you. And it's good to get to spend some time hanging out with my buddy Canadian Spider-Man. And we haven't had a chance to talk that much in a long time, any of us. So thank you. And thank you all in the chat out there. Yeah, well, let's see. Tomorrow night I'll just be doing what I call my wild card Wednesday night. Sometimes I'll throw a topic out there. Sometimes I'll just sit and talk to the audience. We will see. That is, of course, always 9 p.m. Central is when I start. Thursday nights will be, of course, Clobby's Clubhouse with our wonderful first officer, the lovely Raquel, and our great buddy Mark D with the C, who has a great channel. Friday nights I pop up on Nick Weiser's Comic Shop Talk, who is Nick, of course, as I'm sure you all know, is an awesome dude as well, who's doing his Toxic Tuesday tonight, and does a great show Friday night comic shop, which I hang out with those guys, and it's a lot of fun. Saturday I'll have a special Saturday show where I'm going to be with my good buddy J-Man and I and some others. We'll review the new Thor movie. Don't ask me why. I don't have a good answer for you.
Thor.
I can't tell you why.
Don't ask me
Thor.
why.
That's
Is
the
name
name.
of
That's
the
actually
movie.
right. That's the new subtitle of the film, exactly. And then there's Saturday Night Star Trek. We just wrapped up reviewing all of Star Trek: The Next Generation series. So the next 2 weeks we will review the TNG films, and then after that it is on to Deep Space Nine.
Nice.
Yeah.
Looking forward to
Very
that.
good.
Beautiful.
And I hope that one of the mods will pop your channel into the chat. There we go.
There we go.
As usual, Darius Munchausen is
Darius.
he's beating me to it before I even thought it, which is still strange. And of course, you should subscribe to Canadian Spider-Man. And Jill, your channel is coming along. Can you plug your channel and tell us what's going on with your channel?
Sure. Every Tuesday I review the Orville. I reviewed season 1 and 2, and now I'm going through 3. And when we finish, I'm not sure whether I'll go through For All Mankind or just go ahead and do TOS, because I think I'm going to put a poll on Twitter and see what people want more. And on Friday I have a more of a open topic show. Sometimes I'll have Clobby on my show. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why he joins me, but I'm so happy he
Are
does.
you kidding me? Who wouldn't?
And that's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, did I step on something you were about to say?
Nope, that was it.
Oh, okay.
That's all I got
So,
far.
please subscribe to Anti-Derivative Jill's channel. And someday I will realize when I listen back to one of these shows that my Boris Karloff isn't nearly as good as I think it is. So thank you, Jill, for being so civilized and not beating me over the head, you know. Anyway, do please send me an email with your mailing address, CamCam, and all that good stuff, and you will get some brand new and some autographed comics in the mail. And that's always fun. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to mention people can go to gillstore.com and get all kinds of goodies. Masters of the Genre, Into the Fringe, you name it, we've got it. I've got glassware, I've got t-shirts, all kinds of stuff. Yes.
Nice.
As a matter of fact, if you'll hold that there, I'll go ahead and make you big. That's a Midnight to Midnight coffee cup that's black, and
look how big it is.
It's a really good cup to drink coffee out of.
There. It's big, yeah.
And I've got pint glasses and all kinds of stuff. So definitely check that out. And I'm going to go ahead and make you small again there. Mm-hmm. And as a programming note, at 9:30, I'll be doing an unboxing episode. And then tomorrow, we're going to have Walter Bosley on Into the Fringe. So please stay tuned for that. And I do want to thank everybody again on the panel and everyone in the chat for being here. And for all of those people, it's Cardinal Sin out.